Since we are 41 years into it now, it's safe to say that turtle power will never die, but in the late 90s, we did see a huge drop-off in TMNT merchandising, and while everything was down across the board, it was turtle-based video games that saw the biggest fall. In case you never realized, there were precisely 0 games released about teenage ninjas of the mutated variety on either the Nintendo 64, PlayStation, or Saturn. But thankfully, ever since the mid-2000s, Mikey, Leo, Donnie, and Raph have been consistently represented on pretty much every hardware generation thereafter. And as a fan of all things mutant and green and bodacious, I've been pretty happy with this ever since. Because when you look back at the gaming history of the heroes in the half-shell, especially starting from the 2000s, you saw a good amount of variety, as there were games based on whatever was happening on TV or in the theaters, old school throwbacks, or unique pocket universes, and that's a tradition that still continues to this day. There's been a ton of great TMNT projects over the last few years, with many of them hearkening to the past, unafraid to embrace new styles of gameplay today, and future projects we're all dying to see. But for this video, I just want to turtle wax poetic about the beginning, the origins of these fearsome fighting teens in video games, which of course starts with Konami and their 4 distinct arcade and home console smash hits. You know, these radical dudes. So pull up a comfy chair, grab a slice of pizza, and let's party. Now, whether the Turtles need to be saving New York City, feudal Japan, or multiple dimensions, one thing has always proven true. These radical reptiles absolutely work better when they're fighting shell to shell. So that's why the launch of TMNT Splintered Fate on both Xbox One and the Xbox Series X and S comes complete with both local couch and online co-op, allowing you and multiple buddies to take on the Shredder and save Splinter from his fate. As you make your way through each layer of the Big Apple, tearing up familiar enemies and bosses along the way, you'll be leveling up each turtle with a massive repertoire of special moves, ninja tools, and elemental abilities, with some being temporary while others remain permanent, making sure that no run is exactly the same. And if you're already really familiar with the focused style of ninja fighting, then why not call up Casey Jones from the bench in the Junkyard Jam DLC, which further expands the game with an entirely different moveset. Best of all, if you have friends that bought Splintered Fate on other platforms like Switch, Steam, or PlayStation 4 and 5, teaming up is a snap as it features full cross-platform online play. So if you're interested in scrapping Shredhead once and for all, click the link in the description or pinned comment below. Thanks again to Super Evil Megacorp for sponsoring today's video. And now, without further ado, let's travel back in time to some of the TMNT's most bodacious adventures. As you can imagine, getting the rights to develop and publish video games based on the hottest IP in the world in the late 80s was a massive get, and Konami made sure to have all their bases covered, because they knew they were going to make some paper and it was going to be green. 2 projects were put into production at the same time, one for the arcades and the other for the Nintendo Entertainment System, but both simply called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Now, since the cartoon was the most popular form of turtle media at the time, Konami smartly decided to base their arcade game off of that, lifting pretty much every character you'd see on any given Saturday morning, not to mention recreating the intro, using the same theme music, and so on. The plot of the arcade game, such as it is, revolved around Splinter and April having been kidnapped by Shredder and Krang. And yeah, that's it. I mean, it really didn't have to be any more complex than that, because at the time, the plot could have been about the turtles having to deep clean their entire sewer den, and kids still would have played the crap out of it. This is because Konami absolutely nailed the show's vibes and energy, which is what still makes it fun to this day, along with the lovingly animated sprites, colorful stages, and infectious music that just makes you want to kick foot butt with your feet. In fact, the only instance where Konami took some liberties from the cartoon was in fact with Shredder's gang of mechanical ninjas. While the 1987 show mostly highlighted the mass-produced purple variety of foot, the game smartly expanded upon them with every color of the ninja rainbow, with each one being adept at a specific weapon style, which would slightly change your approach to taking them all down. Even more smartly than that, though, was Konami's decision to support 4-player turtle simultaneous play, which, given how popular TMNT was at the time, most likely tripled their potential earnings, making it one of, if not the most successful arcade machine that year. Playing it now in 2025, TMNT Arcade still holds up incredibly well and remains immensely fun whether you're playing solo or with your fellow 40-something-year-old turtle-obsessed buddies. With all that said, there are a few tiny issues with the game that I think bears mentioning. All the in-game sprites look great and accurate to the show designs, all except for one. Like, I know she's always in the background somewhat, but why did they draw April like this? In the cutscenes, she's perfect, but here we got the incredible crash dummy version of her. It's not a big deal, of course, but in an otherwise stellar-looking game, this type of stuff does tend to stand out. Now, when it comes to the stages themselves, Scene 3, Let's Get to That Secret Factory, doesn't have much going for it, as the entire first half is a very basic walk to the right on a really boring nondescript highway, and lacks any sort of set pieces or unique enemies. Compared to the rest of the adventure, this is probably the least interesting bit. Not to say it's bad, it's just not very memorable. And finally, speaking of not so memorable, we have the game's ending. The Technodrome blows up, we're given some text, and yeah. No victory screen, no kiss from April, or Splinter for that matter. Hell, the Turtles don't even get to celebrate with a pizza party. Not gonna lie, but that's pretty depressing. Now, if you were a game-loving kid in 1989, you were most likely super hyped, but then maybe disappointed somewhat when you finally played Ninja Turtles for the NES, as it was a very different and much harder experience, but still remains an integral part of any good 8-bit library. This was developed by a completely separate team at Konami, which to this day has not been fully credited, but if I were to hazard a guess, I'd like to think some of the development team must have crossed over with the previous year's Bayou Billy. Now, I know it said Ultra Games on the packaging, but as most of you should know by now, this was just another label Konami sold under to get around Nintendo's publishing limits, cause make no mistake, this was still Konami hard. As has been said over the decades, TMNT NES can get frustrating because while the first few action stages and the fun of driving the turtle van around lured kids into thinking they'd have an easy breezy time, completing it was anything but. The later levels hid tons of respawning enemies that could deal lots of damage, the turtle van's life bar was shared with your own, there were some very hard to make jumps, and the final couple of bosses were a true test of your mettle. And while all of that remains true, looking back at the many other action games released on the system, TMNT is not too out of line. It's just that this level of challenge wasn't typically associated with a kid-friendly Saturday morning cartoon show. In fact, because of this, TMNT NES feels like it leans a bit more into comic book territory, as evidenced by the darker visual style, the portrait illustrations for the Turtles, April, Splinter, and Shredder, the main box art of course, and the vicious army of enemies you had to face along the way, which were way more intense than anything seen on the show. Dudes with chainsaws, bizarre human torches, massive armored guys, weird Lovecraftian things. It's a threatening menagerie that feels much more at home in the black and white pages of the early comics. Hell, if it wasn't for the in-game color-coded bandanas and the party van, of course, I would think this wasn't based on the cartoon at all. So yes, while it is a tough-ass game, there are some things you simply can't deny about TMNT NES, such as its absolutely killer soundtrack, satisfying sound effects, the immense amount of gameplay variety, or cheesing out Rocksteady with Donatello's staff. If you've ever wanted to challenge yourself and beat this one legit without the use of Game Genie, like I did. There's plenty of online guides out there, but if I was to recommend one, that would be You Can Beat Video Games. And yes, it'll help you navigate through the underwater stage. Moving on, because of the popularity of both the arcade and the first NES game, Konami knew they had to keep this turtle hype train a-rollin', and perhaps realizing that tons of NES-owning fans wanted something closer to the arcade experience, they immediately started work on just that, although it meant it pretty much had to be made from scratch. The slightly confusingly titled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the arcade game, leaped onto the NES at the tail end of 1990. And while a lot had to be changed or taken out during the conversion, like the 4-player co-op, voice samples, authentic intro, and tons of animation frames and colors, what remained was still a fantastic NES beat-em-up that retained the spirit of its big arcade brother. For me, this was the definitive 8-bit Turtles game, as the graphics, gameplay, and especially the music still occupy an entire hallway within my mind palace. Aside from my own personal nostalgia though, Konami made the wait worth it, as they added even more content to the NES version, which made it a bit longer to complete overall. And you guys know me, I always appreciate extra length. So 2 new levels were squeezed right into the middle, missions 3 and 6 respectively, and thankfully for NES only having kids, both were fantastic additions. So, in this version, after clearing the sewer stage, the Turtles had to face the most evil plot of all, which was screwing with NYC's weather, as the Big Apple suddenly turned into an Arctic wasteland, complete with swarms of robots, spiked snowblowers, and probably the coolest, pun very intended, boss in TMNT history. Tora, who as far as I know made their debut here, is a bounty-hunting polar bear from a frozen planet that chucks hail at the Turtles to protect his weather-screwing-up machine. Now, I gotta say, this guy is super cash. Just a husky bear man with a leather jacket and a bad attitude? Ugh, daddy likes! As for how he fits into the story, well, it turns out Shredder hired both Tora and the new level 6 boss to take out the Turtles in a bit of extra insurance. The other new stage is appropriately Japanese themed, sliding paper doors, bamboo traps, and a tense duel with the big bad himself, the Shogun, who I also believe made his debut here, after which the rest of the arcade's levels play out as normal. The only disappointing thing about the NES version is that despite Konami going to the trouble of adding 2 excellent new levels, the ending remains exactly the same. Again, could we not have gotten a pizza celebration or even a single cowabunga? Like, they even retained the weird vaporized into milkshake thing. Vaporized into milkshake. Like, what the hell does that mean? Our next game is, of course, the direct NES sequel, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhattan Project. Another nostalgic memory, but one that has aged slightly worse than the arcade game, in my personal opinion. In this one, the Turtles have decided to go on a vacation in Florida, just totally out there in broad daylight, right on the beach, but I guess 4 mutated creatures that make pop culture references wouldn't be the weirdest thing you'd see in the Sunshine State. The Turtles then get ambushed by the Foot Clan, whereupon the Shredder reveals his new evil plot, which involves levitating the entire island of Manhattan, which he hoped would do something. Anyway, it was just an excuse for our heroes to kick shell through a new assortment of various baddies and bosses, of which this game had many that I'll get to in a sec. Firstly though, the gameplay is pretty identical to what came before, but Konami did include some unique special moves that each turtle can perform. Leo has Endless Screw, Raph has Power Drill, Donnie does a awkward staff flip, while Mikey makes do with a kangaroo kick. It doesn't change the moment-to-moment fighting all that much, but hey, at least it's something. Graphics and sound are top-notch for the NES, as Manhattan Project features yet again another bangin'-ass soundtrack that's just as good as anything else you'd hear on the system. Now, as for the bosses, there's a great selection, including expected mutants like Bebop and Rocksteady, but you also get Toka, Razor, and even Dirtbag and Groundchuck. Now, as fun as the game still is, I do have a few gripes, but before you raise your sighs in anger, they're all minor things. Manhattan Project is absolutely a tougher challenge overall, even playing in co-op, and that's mostly because the levels are so much longer. So by the time you get to any of the bosses, you're already beat to hell, so expect to lose a lot of lives. Secondly, as I alluded to before, TMNT 3 really doesn't do enough to set itself apart from the many other action beat-em-ups of the day, and just feels like more of the same because of it. And finally, I have to address the flagrant lies that adorn the box art. As a kid, I thought Triceratons were some of the coolest bad guys ever, so you can imagine my immense disappointment when I realized they don't appear in Manhattan Project, like, at all. What's up with that? Who signed off on a box art image that prominently shows a character that never ever appears? Well, whoever they are, I sure hope they got fired. Anyway, let's move on to what I assume most of you consider to be the main event. Knowing full well they had a golden goose or turtle on their hands, Konami got their arcade division cracking on a sequel toot sweet, and not wanting to retread too much ground by having them just save New York City again, the fearsome foursome now had to save history itself. TMNT Turtles in Time ate up hoarders across the world in 1991, and while it didn't do anything drastically new, it upped the ante with bigger set pieces, richer sound and music, and more detailed animation, levels, and bosses. However, it's hard to talk about the arcade version of Turtles in Time without immediately comparing it to the SNES port, which, while again having to axe the 4-player co-op, added a lot, and I mean a lot of extra stuff that to many make it the better experience. So let me set the stage. In the arcade original, after fighting waves of legally distinct pizza xenomorph monsters in the sewers, Shredder's head suddenly teleports in and just decides to throw the boys into the past. How far, you ask? Well, all the way back to
prehistoric Turtlesaurus.
In the SNES version, though, the sewers are instead capped off by taking on Rat King atop the patented footski, featuring eel-biting action and comes with all you see here. Then you are whisked away to an exclusive battle through the Technodrome, a boss fight with Tokka and Razar, and then a showdown with Shredder from a very unique perspective, which eventually sends you hurtling into Krang's portal, which then brings you to
prehistoric Turtlesaurus.
This level has one big difference too, because in the SNES port, you have a tough tussle with the ever-awesome Slash, while the arcade version pits you against some kind of pile of goo. If this is a TMNT character, please let me know in the comments below. The arcade's next stage, Skull and Crossbones, has you fight against Tokka and Razar here instead of in the Technodrome, which is fine in and of itself, but the SNES version again does something a bit more fun and appropriate, as Bebop and Rocksteady slide in wearing their finest pirate regalia. Now, if you don't recall this, and I sure didn't, our favorite Rhino and Warthog actually don't appear in the arcade version at all, which is a bit crazy to think about in retrospect. The rest of the game is exactly the same, thankfully, with both versions having no other changes at all, which is something I would be saying to you if it weren't for the final battle with Shredder. In the arcade, he has this very impressive sprite, and he attacks with a green lightsaber, I think. I mean, it's completely serviceable, but I was shocked when I noticed something that was missing from this last fight. I went back and played through the SNES version again, and yeah, he freaking turns into Super Shredder like right away, throwing fireballs and teleporting around the room like he was Akuma. Now, listen, if you're like me, and I know I am, you were always disappointed that the Turtles never got to properly square off with Kevin Nash at the end of Secret of the Ooze.
Oh yeah, I got this! What a pittance!
TMNT 4, Turtles in Time for the SNES, though, finally allows you to live out that fantasy. Wait, actually, come to think of it, I think he also appears at the very end of Manhattan Project 2. His sprite wasn't as recognizable, but he was still all extra spiky and stuff. So, yeah, I guess the home versions sure like their Super Shredder. In summation, all of that, coupled with the better than it should be versus mode, and the fact that attacking enemies in the home port actually feels and sounds a good deal more impactful, to me, the SNES version is my preferred way to play. Yeah, there's no 4-player co-op, its graphics are a bit less colorful, there's less animation, and there's reduced voice samples, but the tighter gameplay, extra levels, and bosses more than makes up for that. At the end of the day though, there's no real loser here. I mean, it's Turtles in Time, it's as goated as a beat-em-up can get. Now, I know what like 12 of you are gonna ask me next. What about Hyperstone Heist? Well, honestly, I have zero nostalgia for that one, and even though it's a neat version, and I'm glad Genesis/Mega Drive kids got a facsimile of the greatness that was Turtles in Time, I don't really have all that much to say about it. And to be fair to myself, I wanted to keep this video focused on the numbered Konami Quadrilogy, as all of them played a very big part in my early video game memories. And of course, while I appreciated the fact that Konami stepped in once again to develop games based on the 2003 TMNT series, which revived the whole IP, I do feel like those 3D games failed to capture the same magic that made the 2D ones special. But if you'd like to champion a particular game from that era of Konami, either on consoles or handhelds, let me know in the comments below and maybe I'll check them out over on my second gameplay channel. So, with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this little jaunt down the early video game history of our favorite radical reptiles, and as a big fan of them and beat-em-ups myself, it's been so energizing to see that these two fabulous pizza toppings still go great together. Oh, and speaking of pizza, whoever has the least amount of life gets first dibs. This is non-negotiable. So until then, I'm McMuscles, and I'll see you next time, dudes.